Alright, hi everyone. I think I'm live, but एक और कंफर्म कर लेते हैं. हम्म. So, वैसे तो ये वीडियो हम एनालाइज करने वाले थे, बट तुम्हें टाइटल देख के पता चल ही गया होगा. मैं एनालाइज नहीं करने वाला. मैं वीआरसी सॉल्व करूंगा और फिर मैं तीनों कल एनालाइज करूंगा एक साथ. दो मैंने अपनी तरफ से कर लिए हैं, मैंने वीडियो में नहीं किए, बट मैंने खुद से कर लिए थे. क्या गलतियां थी क्या नहीं वो सब मैंने देख लिया. अब बस इतना रह गया है कि वीडियो बनानी है, तो वो मैं कल बना दूंगा. ऑलराइट. नाउ ये है स्लॉट 2021 VARC सेक्शन. अब हम मैं सॉल्व करूंगा. लिंक मैंने एग्जाम का पेपर का नीचे दे रखा है, तुम्हें साथ सॉल्व करना है तो तुम ज्वाइन कर सकते हो. और बाकी 40 मिनट अपना टाइम है ही नॉर्मल. 20 कितने हो रहे हैं? 8:59 हो रहे हैं, तो 9 बजे हम शुरू कर देंगे, 9:40 तक चलेंगे. और उसके बाद अगली वीडियो में हम एनालाइज कर लेंगे. मैं बोल के सॉल्व करूंगा, तो तुम्हें साथ सॉल्व करना है तो म्यूट कर लेना, अलग से करना है तो बंद करके कर लेना, फिर बाद में वीडियो देख लेना. बाकी लास्ट वाली बीआरसी में मेरे कितने 10-12 नंबर थे, इस वाले में देखते हैं कितने आते हैं. डीएलआर में थोड़ा इंप्रूव हुआ, थोड़ा हमारा पॉइंट में भी इंप्रूव हुआ. अब इसमें देख लेते हैं इसमें कितना इंप्रूव होता है. तो बच गए हमारे 9. शुरू करते हैं और मैं बोल के ही सॉल्व करूंगा. ओके. हमें ये तो आइडिया ही है कि आ क्या रहा है इसमें. तो मैं पैसेजेस और समरी ही सॉल्व करने की कोशिश करूंगा, पैराजम्बल्स नहीं छूंगा. ना मैं उसमें स्ट्रांग हूँ और ना उसका प्रोबेबिलिटी उसके ठीक होने की अच्छी होती है. Many people believe that truth conveys power, hence sticking with the truth is the best way for gaining power. Unfortunately, this is just a comforting myth. In fact, truth and power have a far more complicated relationship because in human society, power means two very different. मतलब कुछ abstract ideas की बात हो रही है, पावर और ट्रूथ की. कुछ देखते हैं और आगे. पहले अभी थोड़ा सा तो पता ही. On the other hand, power means having the ability to manipulate objective realities, to hunt animals, to construct bridges, to cure diseases, to build atom bombs. This kind of power is closely tied to truth. If you believe a false physical theory, you won't be able to build an atom bomb. Okay, तो यहाँ वो बता रहा है कैसे यहाँ पे पावर जो है वो ट्रूथ से कनेक्टेड है. On the other hand, power also means having the stability to manipulate human beliefs, thereby getting lots of people to cooperate effectively. Building atom bombs requires not just a good understanding of physics but also the coordinated labor of millions of humans. Planet Earth was conquered by Homo sapiens rather than by chimpanzees or elephants because we are the only mammals that can cooperate in very large numbers, and large scale cooperation depends on believing common stories. But these stories need not be true. You can unite millions of people by making them believe in completely fictional stories about God, about race, or about economics. The dual nature of power and truth results in the curious fact that we humans know many more truths than any other animal, but we also believe in much more nonsense. Right? When it comes to uniting, when it comes to uniting people around a common story, fictional. अब वो बात होने लगी है स्टोरी के बारे में. अभी तक हमने देखा कैसे ट्रूथ और पावर में तो कनेक्शन है ही है, बट जरूरी नहीं कि ट्रूथ एग्जिस्ट करना चाहिए फॉर पावर, क्योंकि एक लार्ज कोऑर्डिनेशन जो है जिसमें कि एक मतलब जो एक स्टोरी के थ्रू या किसी फिक्शन के थ्रू भी लोगों को जोड़ा जा सकता है. इट कैन ऑल्सो भी मतलब वो एक तरीके से फॉल्स भी हो सकता है, तो उसमें कोई बड़ी बात नहीं है, बट इट कैन बी द सोर्स ऑफ पावर. नाउ दूसरा पैसेज बोल रहा है कि when it comes to uniting people around a common story, fiction actually enjoys three inherent advantages over the truth. First, whereas the truth is universal, fictions tend to be local. Okay. Consequently, if we want to distinguish a tribe from foreigners, a fictional story will serve as a far better identity marker than a true story. ओके. द सेकंड ह्यूज एडवांटेज, और क्योंकि ट्रूथ में तो तुम जाहिर सी बात है कुछ कॉमन बात करोगे, बट फिक्शन में तुम ऐसे एक्सजरेट करते हो अपनी फीचर्स, सामने वाले के फीचर्स, तुम डिफरेंसेस को एक्सजरेट करते हो, तो वो सब चीजें फिक्शन में ही हो सकती है. ट्रूथ इज वेरी मंडेन. The second huge advantage of fiction over truth has to do with the handicapped people, which says that reliable signals must be costly to the signaler. Otherwise, they can easily be faked by cheaters. If political loyalty is signaled by believing a true story, anyone can fake it, but believing ridiculous and outlandish stories exacts greater cost and is therefore a better signal of loyalty. Third and most important, the truth is often painful and disturbing. Hence, if you stick to unalloyed reality, few people will follow you. An American presidential candidate who tells the American public the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about American history has a 100% guarantee of losing the elections, and uncompromising adherence to the truth is an admirable spiritual practice, but it is not a winning political strategy, right? Even if we need to pay some price for deactivating our rational faculties, the advantage of increased social cohesion, even if we need to pay some price for deactivating our rational faculties, the advantage of increased social cohesion are often so big that fictional stories routinely triumph over the truth in the human history. Scholars have known this for thousands of years, which is why scholars often had to decide whether they serve the truth or social harmony. Should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same fiction, or should they let people know the truth even at the price of disunity? Okay, अच्छा है passage. The central theme of the passage is about पहले मैं questions लिख लूँ 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 पहला बोलता है द सेंट्रल थीम ऑफ द पैसेज इज अबाउट द चॉइस बिटवीन स्टोरीज दैट यूनाइट पीपल एंड दोज दैट डिस्टिंग्विश ग्रुप्स फ्रॉम ईच अदर नहीं अटेनिंग सोशल कोहेजन एंड प्रोपगेटिंग ऑब्जेक्टिव ट्रूथ एक ये हो सकता है ट्रूथ एंड पावर ये भी हो सकता है truth and power leaders who unknowingly spread fictions and those who intentionally do so सेकंड और थर्ड में से मुझे लग रहा है ट्रूथ एंड पावर द सेंट्रल थीम ऑफ द पैसेज अबाउट द चॉइस बिटवीन बट सेकंड जो है वो थोड़ा और बेटर मतलब एक्सप्लेन कर रहा है ट्रूथ एंड पावर उतना बेटर एक्सप्लेन नहीं कर रहा दो बात सेम ही है बट थोड़ा और स्पेसिफिक है अटेनिंग सोशल कोहेजन एंड प्रोपोगेटिंग ऑब्जेक्टिव ट्रूथ तो मैं जाऊंगा दो के साथ सेंट्रल थीम the author implies that like scholars successful leaders use myths to attain नहीं know how to balance truth and social unity ये बोल सकते हैं need to leverage both types of power to remain in office I don't think so today know how to create social cohesion better than in the past ये तो बात हुई नहीं know how to balance truth and social unity I would go with the second one here too regarding which one of the following quotes could we argue that the author overemphasizes the importance of fiction regarding which one of the following quotes could we argue that the author overemphasizes the importance of fiction? Scholars often had to decide whether they serve the truth or should they. In fact, truth and power have a far more complicated relationship because in human society, power means two very different things. On the one hand, power means having the ability to manipulate objective. अभी ना मेरे दिमाग में ये नहीं चल रहा है कि क्वेश्चन का मतलब क्या सेंटेंस का मतलब क्या अभी मेरे दिमाग में एक क्वेश्चन की वाइब है और एक मैं आंसर की वाइब ढूंढ रहा हूँ एक्चुअली में टू बी ऑनेस्ट मुझे समझ नहीं आया क्वेश्चन क्या पूछा है और मैं आंसर में क्या लिखे ऑप्शन में बस अभी वाइब कैच कर रहा हूँ वाइब कैच करके उसके बाद मैं क्वेश्चन पढ़ूंगा ऑन द वन हैंड पावर मीन्स हैविंग द एबिलिटी on the one hand, regarding which one of the following quotes could be argued that the author overemphasizes the importance of fiction? ये तो नहीं ऑन द वन हैंड पावर मींस हैविंग द एबिलिटी टू मैनिपुलेट ऑब्जेक्टिव रियलिटीज इसमें फिक्शन की तो बात हुई नहीं है हेंस स्टिकिंग विद द ट्रूथ इज द बेस्ट स्ट्रेटेजी फॉर गेनिंग पावर अनफॉर्चुनेटली दिस इज जस्ट अ कंफर्टिंग मिथ ये थोड़ा ओवर एम्फेसाइज किया है दिस इज जस्ट अ कंफर्टिंग मिथ आई थिंक आई विल गो विद 4 और तीसरा तो नहीं था स्कॉलर्स ऑफन हैड टू डिसाइड वेदर दे सर्व द ट्रूथ whether they serve the truth or social harmony should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same fiction or should they let people know the truth ये भी नहीं पहला और चौथे में से कोई लग रहा है मुझे है चलो मैं उसे बाद में देखता हूँ the author would support none of the following statements about political power the author would support none of the following statements about political power Manipulate people's beliefs in politically. The author would support none of the following statements or political power except that manipulate people's beliefs manipulating people's beliefs is politically advantageous, but a leader who propagates only myths is likely to lose power. नहीं, इनमें से वो जो सपोर्ट करेगा वो वाला है ना। ये तो नहीं सपोर्ट करेगा वो। There are different definite advantages to promoting fiction, but there needs to be some limit to pervasive beliefs in myths. ये भी सेकंड हो सकता है, वो सपोर्ट करे। While unalloyed truth is not recommended, readers should stay as close as possible to it. पता नहीं, people cannot handle the unvarnished truth, so leaders retain power by deviating from it. ये तो मुझे नहीं पता चल रहा है, इसे मैं बाद में देखूंगा। अगला पैसे ही पढ़ते हैं। I have elaborated a framework for analyzing the contradictory pulls on Indian nationalist ideology in its struggle against the dominance of colonialism. I have elaborated a framework for analyzing the contradictory pulls on nationalist ideology in its struggle against the dominance of colonialism and resolution it offered to those को मतलब कुछ history की बात हो रही है. Briefly, this resolution was built around the separation of the domain of culture into two spheres. This resolution, the material and the spiritual, it was in the material sphere that the claims of Western civilization were the most powerful. Science, technology, rational forms of economic organization, modern methods of statecraft. These had given the European countries the strength to subjugate the non-European people. To overcome this domination, the colonized people had to learn those superior techniques of organizing material life and incorporate them within their own culture. But this could not mean the imitation of the West in every aspect of life. For then, the very distinction between the West and East would vanish. The self-identity of national culture would itself be threatened. So, the discourse of nationalism shows that the material spiritual distinction was condensed into an analogous but ideologically far more powerful dichotomy that between the outer and the inner. Applying the inner outer distinction to the matter of concrete day-to-day living separates the social space into ghar and bahir, the home and the world. The world is the external, the domain of the material. The home represents one's inner spiritual self, one's true identity. The world is the treacherous terrain of the pursuit of material interests, whereas where practical considerations reign supreme, it is also typically the domain of the male. The home, in its essence, must remain unaffected by the profane activities of the material world, and woman is its representation, and so one gets as an identification of social roles by gender to correspond with the separation of the social space into ghar and bahir. The colonial situation and the ideological response of nationalism to the critique of Indian. Okay, हम भटक गए. The colonial situation and the ideological response of nationalism to the critique of the colonial situation and the ideological response of nationalism to the critique of Indian tradition introduced an entirely new substance to these dichotomies and affected their transformation. The material spiritual dichotomy to which the terms world and home corresponded had acquired a very special significance in the nationalist mind. The world was where the European power had challenged the non-European peoples and by virtue of its superior material culture had subjugated them. But the nationalists asserted it had failed to colonize the inner essential identity of the East, which lay in its distinctive and superior spiritual culture. In the entire phase of the national struggle, the crucial need was to protect, preserve, and strengthen the inner core of the national culture, its spiritual essence. So once we match this new meaning of the home world dichotomy with the identification of social roles by gender, we get the ideological framework within which nationalism answered the women's questions It would be a grave error to see in this, as liberals are apt to, in their despair at the many marks of social conservatism in national practice, a total rejection of the West. Quite the contrary, the nationalist paradigm in fact supplied an ideological principle of selection. To be honest, ये तो मुझे कुछ समझ में भी नहीं आया, but that doesn't mean कि हम इसे सॉल्व नहीं करेंगे या फिर वाकई में हम सॉल्व नहीं करेंगे. Alright, let's see. On the basis of the information in the passage, all of the following are true about the spiritual material dichotomy of Indian nationalism, except on the basis of the information in the passage, all of the following are true about the spiritual material dichotomy of Indian nationalism, except that it helped in safeguarding the identity of Indian nationalism. पता नहीं यार. बोल रहा है I have elaborated a framework. It's very hard to leave. चलो आज हम छोड़ के देखते हैं. It's easy to forget that most of the world's languages are transmitted orally with no widely established written form, while speech communities are increasingly involved in projects to protect their languages. Hmm. It's easy to forget that most of the world's languages are still transmitted orally with no widely established written form, while speech communities are increasingly involved in projects to protect their languages. In print, while speech communities are increasingly involved in projects to protect their languages in print, orality is fragile and continues to linguistic vulnerability. But indigenous languages are also much more than unusual words and intriguing grammar. They function as vehicles for a transmission of cultural traditions, environmental understandings, and knowledge about medical plants, all at risk when elders die and livelihoods are disrupted. While speech communities are increasingly involved, both push and pull factors lead to the decline of languages, though through war, famine, and natural disasters, whole communities can be destroyed, taking their languages within them to the grave, such as the indigenous population of Tasmania, who were wiped out by colonists. More commonly, speakers live on but abandon their language in favor of another vernacular. A widespread causes that linguists refer to as language shift from which few languages are immune. Such fading up and out of speech form occurs for complex political, cultural, and economic reasons, sometimes voluntary for economic and educational reasons, although often amplified by state coercion or neglect. Welsh, long stigmatized and disparaged by the British state, has rebounded with vigor. Many speakers of endangered, poorly documented languages have embraced new digital media with excitement. Many speakers of endangered, poorly documented languages have embraced new digital media with excitement. Speakers of previously exclusive oral tongues are turning to the web as a virtual space for language to live on. Internet technology offers powerful ways for oral traditions and cultural practices to survive, even thrive among increasingly mobile communities. I have watched as videos of traditional wedding ceremonies and songs are recorded on smartphones in London by Nepali migrants, then uploaded to YouTube and watched an hour later by relatives in remote Himalayan villages. Globalization is regularly and often uncritically parodied as a major threat to linguistic diversity, but in fact, globalization is as much process as it is ideology, certainly when it comes to language. The real forces behind cultural homogenization are unbending beliefs exchanged through a globalized delivery system reinforced by the historical monolingualism prevalent in much of the West. Monolingual Monolingualism, the condition of being able to speak only one language, is regularly accompanied by a deep-seated conviction in the value of that language over all others. Across the largest economies that make up the G8, being monolingual is still often the norm, with multilingual appearing unusual and even somewhat exotic. The monolingual mindset stands in sharp contrast to the lived reality of most the world, which throughout its history has been more multilingual than unilingual. Monolingualism multilingualism, then not globalization should be our primary concern. Multilingualism can help us live in a more connected and more interdependent way by widening across access to technology. Globalization can support indigenous and scholarly communities engaged in documenting and protecting our shared linguistic heritage. For the last 5,000 years, the rise and fall of language was intimately tied to the plow, sword, and book. In our digital age, the keyboard, screen, and web will play a decisive role in shaping the future linguistic delivery of our species. पता नहीं क्या है भाई. Multilingualism can help us live in a more connected and more independent world by widening access to technology. Globalization can support indigenous and scholarly communities engaged in documenting and protecting our shared linguistic heritage. For the last 5,000 years, the rise and fall of languages was intimately tied to the plow, sword, and book. In our digital age, the keyboard, screen, and web will play a shaping the future linguistic diversity of our species. By widening access to technology, globalization can support indigenous and scholarly communities engaged in documenting and protecting our shared linguistic heritage. Oxford in a book. The author lists all of the following as reasons for the decline or disappearance of language, except governments promoting certain languages over others, a catastrophic event that ठीक है दूसरा दिया people shifting away from the ठीक है or the focus on only a few languages as a result of wide. Fourth, क्या है question number 9. From the passage, we can infer that the author is in favor of cultural homogenization. Is he? From the passage, we can infer that the author is in favor of greater multilingualism, कल्चरल होमोजेनाइजेशन तो नहीं है, ग्रेटर मल्टीलिंगुअल यही लग रहा है मुझे. लिंगुअलिज्म एंड एक्सपेंडेड स्टेट रोल इन द प्रिजर्वेशन ऑफ लैंग्वेजेस, ये भी हो सकता है क्योंकि इन्फर can support why it is easy to forget that most of the world languages are still transmitted orally with no widely established written form, while speech communities are increasingly involved in projects to protect the languages in print, on air, and or online. Orality is fragile and contributes to linguistic vulnerability, but indigenous languages are much more. They function as आई थिंक इट 10th में ना थर्ड इन्फर्ड है, फोर्थ तो ऑब्वियस ही है ना. एक्सपेंडेड मल्टीलिंगुअलिज्म लिंगुअलिज्म. All right, I will go for four. I don't know why. We can infer all the following about indigenous languages from the passage, except that they are repositories. कौन सी indigenous language from they are repositories of traditional knowledge about ठीक है. We can infer the people are increasingly working on documenting these languages. I don't know. They are in danger of being wiped out. In most can only or can we or ठीक है. Their vocabulary and grammatical constructs have been challenging to document. I think I will go with four. The author mentions the Welsh language to show that while often florid globalization can in fact support नहीं इन्होंने Welsh रीजन तो दिया ही नहीं है Welsh ने rebound क्योंकि both push and pull factors lead to the decline of languages through Tasmania. More commonly, speakers live on but abandon their language in favor of another vernacular. Widespread process that linguists refer to as language shift, from which few languages are immune. Such trading up and out of a speech from out of a speech form, sometimes voluntary for economic and educational reasons, although often amplified by state coercion or neglect. Wells long stigmatized and disparaged. Okay, okay, कौन सा है हमारा 12वां? The author mentions the हाँ हाँ first Sheikh. It has been said that knowledge, it has been said that knowledge or the problem of knowledge is a scandal of philosophy. Okay, my all right. It has been said that knowledge or the problem of knowledge is a scandal of philosophy. The scandal is philosophy's apparent inability to show how, when, and why we can be sure that we know something or indeed that we know anything. Philosopher Michael Williams writes, is it possible to obtain knowledge at all? This problem is pressing because there are powerful arguments of variation for the conclusion that it is not. Skepticism is the skeleton in Western rationalism closet. While it is not clear that a scandal matters to anyone but philosophers point out that it should matter to everyone, at least given a certain conception of language. For they explain, unless we can ground our claims to knowledge as such, which is to say distinguish it from mere opinion, superstition, fantasy, wishful thinking, ideology, illusion, or delusion, then the actions we take on the basis of presumed knowledge, boarding an airplane, swallowing a pill, finding someone guilty of a crime will be irrational and unjustifiable. कुछ knowledge की बात हो रही है. Okay. छोटा सा है पैसे. Should we read it? It has been okay. That is all quite serious sounding, but so also the rattlings of the skeleton. That is the skeptic's contention. But so also are the rattlings of the skeleton. That is the skeptic's contention that we cannot be sure that we know anything, at least not if we think of knowledge as something like having a correct mental representation of reality, and not if we think of reality as something like things as they are in themselves, independent of our perceptions, ideas, or descriptions. For the skeptic will note, since reality under that conception of it is outside our ken, we cannot get a glimpse of things in themselves or on the corner of our eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that fruits out of the process of our conceiving it. We have no way to compare our mental representation with things as they are in themselves, and therefore no way to determine whether they are correct or incorrect. Thus, the skeptic may repeat, you cannot be sure you know something or anything at all, at least not, he may add, rattling softly before disappearing, if that is the way you conceive knowledge. There are a number of ways to handle the situation. The most common is to ignore it. Most people outside the academy, and indeed most of us inside it, are unaware of or unperturbed by the philosophical scandal of knowledge and go about our lives without too many epistemic anxieties. We hold our beliefs and presumptive knowledges more or less confidently, usually depending on how we acquired them. I saw it in my own eyes. I heard it on Fox News. A guy at the office told me, and how broadly and strenuously they seem to have shared or endorsed by various relevant people, experts and authorities, friends and family members, colleagues and associates. And we examine our convictions more or less closely, explain them more or less extensively, and defend them more or less vigorously, usually depending on what seems to be at stake for ourselves and or other people, and what resources are available for reassuring ourselves or making our beliefs credible to others. Look, it's right here on the page. Add up the figures yourself. I happen to be a heart specialist. और कुछ बात हो रही है कि नॉलेज क्या है, उसके बेसिस पे कि उसे कैसे परसीव किया जाता है, कैसे कंज्यूम किया जाता है स्केप्टिक ऑफ फिलोसोफर की. इट हैज बीन सेड दैट नॉलेज ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ नॉलेज इज द स्कैंडल ऑफ फिलोसफी. स्कैंडल बोला जाता है द स्कैंडल इन इज फिलोसफी apparent inability to show how, when and why we can be sure. The scandal is philosophy's apparent inability to show that how, when, and why we can be sure that we know something, or indeed that we know anything. Philosopher Michael Williams writes, "Is it possible to obtain knowledge at all? This problem is pressing because there are powerful arguments, some very ancient, for the conclusion that it is not. Skepticism is the skeleton in Western rationalism's closet. Skepticism is a skeleton in Western's rationalism closet. While it is not clear that the scandal matters to anyone, but philosophers point out that it should not matter to everyone, at least given a certain conception of language knowledge. For they explain, unless we can ground our claims to knowledge as such, which is to say distinguish it from mere opinion, superstition, fantasy, wishful thinking, ideology, illusion or delusion, then the actions we take on the basis of presumed knowledge, boarding an airplane, swallowing a pill, finding someone guilty of a crime, will be irrational and unjustifiable. The author of the passage is most likely to support which of the following statements? For the skeptic, if we think of reality as independent of our perceptions, ideas or descriptions, we should aim to know that reality independently. If we think of reality as independent of our perceptions, ideas or descriptions, we should aim to know that reality independently too. स्केप्टिक का पर 30 ज्यादा से ज्यादा हम 3 मिनट और देंगे, फिर नहीं देंगे इसे. According to the last paragraph of passage, we hold our beliefs and presumptive knowledge more or less confidently, usually depending on something. Which one of the following most broadly captures what we depend on? All of the options listed here. How we come to hold them, how widely they are held in our social circles. According to the last paragraph of the passage, we hold our beliefs and presumptive knowledges more or less confidently. How we come to hold them, how widely they are held in our social circles. Second ठीक है. और remaining outside the academic ठीक है. All of them. 14th का first. We cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves or around the corner of our own eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats out of the process of our conceiving it. Which one of the following statements best reflects the argument being made in this sentence? We cannot catch a glimpse of things in themselves around the corner of our own eyes. We cannot form an idea of reality that floats out of the process of conceiving it. Which one of the following statements best reflects the argument being made in this sentence? Our knowledge of reality floats above our subjective पता नहीं यार. The author discusses all of the following arguments in the passage except the author discusses all of the following arguments in the passage. नहीं ये नहीं है. Skeptics नहीं, फर्स्ट होगा 16 में. Okay. 17. Summary. Biologists who publish their research directly to the web have been labeled as rogue, but physicists have been routinely publishing research digitally prior to submitting in a peer-reviewed journal. Advocates of preprints argue that quick and open dissemination of research speeds up scientific progress and allows for wider access to knowledge, but some journals still don't accept research previously published as a preprint. Even if the idea of preprints is gaining ground, one of the biggest barriers for the biologists is how they would be viewed by members of their conservative research community. One of the advantages of digital preprints or research is they are standardized. Alright, somewhat ठीक ठाक है. While digital publication of research is gaining, one of the advantages of digital preprints की बात हो रही है. While digital publication of research is gaining popularity in many. नहीं, ये तो बात ही नहीं है. तीसरा, compared to biologists, physicists are less conservative in their acceptance of digital pre-publication of research papers, which allows for faster dissemination of. By some scientific fields, they do not undergo a rigorous reviewing process but are accepted among biologists as a quick way to disseminate information. Gaining ground, one of the biggest barriers for biologists is how they would be viewed by the members of the conservative research community. Okay, while digital publication of research is gaining popularity in many scientific disciplines, almost all peer-reviewed journals are reluctant to accept papers that have been published before. नहीं, preprints of research are frowned on by some scientific fields as they do not undergo a rigorous reviewing process but are accepted among biologists as a quick way to disseminate. ये ठीक हो सकता है. One of the advantages of digital preprints of research is the external dissemination process, but they are not accepted by most scientist communities. One है अपना five jumbled essence. Creativity is now viewed as the engine of economic progress. Creativity is now viewed as the engine of economic progress. Various organizations are devoted to its study and promotion. There are encyclopedias and handbooks serving creativity research. But this proliferating success has tended to erode creativity's stable identity. It has become so invested with its value that it has become impossible to police its meaning and the practices that supposedly identify and encourage. Many people and organizations committed to producing original thoughts now feel that undue obsession with the idea of creativity gets in the way of real creativity. Alright. The obsession with original thought, how it can be promoted in research, has made it impossible for people and organizations to define the concept anymore. Define creativity has proliferated to the extent that that is no longer a stable process and its mutating identity has stifled the creative process. ये ठीक ठाक लग रहा है. The value assigned to creativity today has assumed such proportions that the concept itself has lost its real meaning, and this is hampering the engendering of real creativity. The industry that is built up around researching and comprises what comprises and encourages creativity has destroyed the creative process itself. हमें यहाँ पे समरी समझ में आ गई बट यार यहाँ पे आंसर नहीं समझ में आ रहा था. ऑब्सेशन विद ओरिजिनल थॉट, हाउ इट कैन बी प्रमोटेड इन रिसर्च. ये नहीं, creativity has proliferated to the extent that it is no longer a stable process. Creativity नहीं proliferate हुई है. The value assigned to creativity today has assumed such proportions that the concept itself has. It is built up around researching what comprises. Third, fourth भी हो सकता है. The industry that build छोड़ो, अपना हो गया फोर्थ, चूज ऑप्शन। The unlikely alliance of the incumbent industrialists and the distressed unemployed worker is especially powerful. The unlikely alliance of the incumbent industrialists and the distressed unemployed worker is especially powerful, and the debris of corporate bankruptcies be powerful amid the debris of corporate bankruptcies and layoffs. In an economic downturn, the capitalists is more likely to focus on costs of the competition emanating from free markets than on the opportunities they create, and the unemployed worker will find many others in similar condition and with anxieties similar to this, which will make it easier for them to organize together. Using the cover and the political organization provided by the distress, the capitalist captures the political agenda. An unlikely alliance of the industrialists and पता नहीं यार, अब मैं कौन सा था, तीसरा वाला छोड़ के आया था ना, तीसरा देखता हूँ। Regarding which one of the following quotes could be argued that the author overemphasizes the importance of fiction? इसमें मेरे किस किस में डाउट था, चार में और एक में। Scholars often had to decide whether they serve the truth of social harmony. Should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the fourth? I will go with four. Okay, तो हमारा टाइम इज ओवर 9:39। हमने कितने क्वेश्चन किए, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 11। बहुत ज्यादा परसेंटाइल नहीं आएगी हमारी इंग्लिश में, बट सिंस मेरी बिहार से वीक है, देन आई थिंक इट विल बी गुड फॉर मी। और अभी तो हम और प्रैक्टिस करेंगे और आगे तक जाने की कोशिश करेंगे, 12 से 15। अगर हमने अपने 15 क्वेश्चन कर लिए, देन आई थिंक वी विल एबल टू स्कोर 95 आउट परसेंटाइल इन दी एक्चुअल एग्जाम। पहले मैंने चेक करूंगा, फिर मैं कल इन्हें एनालाइज करूंगा तीनों को एक साथ। सो सी यू देयर, तुम खुद से अपनी प्रैक्टिस करते रहो, एग्जाम में सिर्फ 20 डेज बाकी, एंड आई विल सी यू टुमारो विद द एनालिसिस ऑफ दिस। बाय।